Hi, welcome to the Wednesday night Bible study. This is the 18th installment of our series called Hall of Faith. I'm calling this the Cloud of Witnesses. And if all goes well, this will be our last installment of the Hall of Faith series. We recall, inspired by the writer of the book of Hebrews, we began back in the beginning of chapter 11 of Hebrews, verse 1, with this. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And we've been spending a lot of time going through the list of ancients or Old Testament characters that this author of Hebrews brings up. The list of those that he does bring up, wanting to commend, is this list. We'll see for the last time. And the last several weeks we did Joshua and Rahab, leaving us with just the ones that underline there. We got Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. Okay. And that comes in verse 32, those characters. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. So he's saying these are also very good examples of faith, but he's given enough examples, I guess. There's no time for more. Those first four people are judges. And then David we've studied in a previous Bible study series, and he's, of course, a king. And then Samuel is the first prophet. So he's mentioning Samuel and the other prophets. We ran into him studying David. All right, now looking at those four judges, Gideon being the first. This isn't in chronological order of these judges, maybe by maybe how well known they were, perhaps. But just to give you a little piece of information about him, he was a frightened farmer whose faith did not grow strong right away, but it later did gain strength. And you can hear his story or read his story in Judges chapter 6, verse 11 to Judges 7, verse 25. So Judges 6 and 7 covers Gideon. Barak, I'll just say that he won a resounding victory, but he needed the prophetess Deborah as his helper to assure him. Sounds intriguing, huh? That's covered in Judges chapter 4, beginning with chapter 4 and going into chapter 5, verse 31. So all of 4 and chapter 5 of Judges. Samson is a judge that is maybe more well known. You may have run across his name, especially in affiliation with Samson and Delilah. Does that ring a bell? So he yielded to his fleshly appetites. We wouldn't necessarily call Samson a godly man. He was a Nazarite, not a Nazarene, but a Nazarite, which meant he was dedicated to God as a child. He was never to cut his hair or partake of the fruit of the vine. Never drink wine, never cut your hair. He's kind of legendary for being a strong man, and it was like tied in with his hair being, by losing his hair, he would lose his strength. He did have a weakness, though, for Delilah, and that got him into trouble. He did trust God to help him and deliver him in the end. And also in the end, Samson was willing to give his life to defeat the enemy. You can read his story from Judges chapter 13 through 16. Then a little-known guy named Jephthah dedicated his only daughter to the Lord, to perpetual virginity for her. And he's talked about in Judges chapter 11, verse 1 to chapter 12, verse 7. So Judges 11 and 12. Then we come to David. Definitely a great example of a man of faith. We spent a lot of time with his story. His life had ups and downs, but never did his faith have ups and downs. It was steady faith. And then we have Samuel and the other prophets. Samuel was the first. He began a long line of prophets. You recall, he was the one who anointed David. Well, actually, King Saul first, and then King David. That was Samuel. All right. So, no time to mention the details about their faith, except to mention them by name. Next, we're going to read some descriptions of unnamed Old Testament characters. But they did certain things through their faith, and we can kind of gather who they are. So, he mentions those by name, and then he says, verse 33, just to finish that, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. Now, who's he talking about there? Who through faith conquered kingdoms. Well, that could be David. He definitely did. Or it could be Gideon. He had that experience. That was part of his story. Now, they said ministering justice. That could be talking about any of the judges, or perhaps Samuel, the prophet, and then gain what was promised. Continuing on, the second half of verse 33, who shut the mouths of lions. Well, we even studied him in the Bible study earlier. That's Daniel, right? Shut the mouths of lions. Or quench the fury of the flames. And that's also a Daniel story. The 3 Hebrew children and the fiery furnace story. That's probably what the writer of Hebrews is referring to. And escape the edge of the sword. That could be David. That could be Elijah. Either one of those characters. Whose weakness was turned to strength. That's Samson. And who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. That could be Barak. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Well, now that is women who dealt with Elijah and Elisha, which would be covered in 1 Kings chapter 17 and 2 Kings chapter 4. Their stories about women receive back their dead. Okay, so some of these he's mentioning, these are mountain peaks. These are high points of actions with faith. But now what would follow, instead of the high mountain peaks, are the dark valleys we're going to read here. Starting in the second half of verse 35. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. So the writer of Hebrews is not sugarcoating it. Faith and perseverance often go together, but faith doesn't guarantee good times. The Christians he was writing to might also have to suffer some of these same persecutions. So this whole discussion is perhaps to give them some encouragement. Now, verse 39 and 40, following this, let's see what happened to 38. I don't see 38. We'll just keep on there with 37b. That's the part that I read. Caves and holes in the ground. Okay, I just didn't give that to you. All right. Now we're ready for 39. It summarizes the experiences of the triumphant as well as the tragic folks in the Old Testament. In verse 39, these were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So a more accurate translation than commended might be gained approval. Notice it's not approval for their successes. God doesn't pass out grades on how successful their lives were, or how much they suffered, or how well they suffered. They gained approval for what? They gained approval for their faith. Now, none of them had received what had been promised. Now, the author brought this up several verses ago, way back in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. I'm going to read that again. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. So they received promises, but not the promise. And what was the promise they longed to receive and didn't? It's the very thing that each one of us has received. The promise of the Christ, the Messiah, promise of a Savior, a Redeemer. They lived by a faith that looked into a distant future. We live by a faith that looks back 2,000 years. All those people of faith are made perfect or completed through us. It's also like a spiritual family tree. Without them, we would have no roots. But without us, they would have no branches, leaves, flowers, using that tree analogy. A goal for us, since we know Jesus, can be to complete what they began. Their completion is their salvation and resurrection from the dead. Something else they longed for, in Hebrews 16, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. So one day, we'll all share the new Jerusalem, those Old Testament characters as well as us. I find the next words very inspiring and encouraging. This is the beginning of chapter 12. We'll just look at the first verse here, and that's where we'll end. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So that therefore ties chapter 11 with this one. And this one verse has a lot to say. Let's look at that. Let us run the race marked for us. The New Testament often describes the Christian life as a race to be run. We find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 that Paul wrote. Galatians, also Paul. Philippians, also Paul. Words of Paul. I'm going to show us 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. This thoughts of race, being a race. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. So you get some good advice here. Training is important. Keeping focused, not aimless, is important. Yeah. There's one modification I like to make from what Paul says, and that's what he says in verse 24, that only one gets the prize. The good news is that we can all get the prize. We can even help each other. And what is our prize? As it says here, an everlasting victory crown. Okay, let's get back to the words of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 1. We read it already. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. There's an important aspect to the race we're running. Let us run with perseverance or endurance the race marked for us. It's a good time to bring up that word translated race. We're all in a race. Run with perseverance, the race. It's from the Greek word agona. It's where we get the word agony. We as Christians are in an arena where there is pain, there's heartache, there's sickness, there's sorrow, there's pressure, there's hardship, there's death. Throughout our lives, our perseverance, our endurance is being tested. And it's not a sprint, it's an endurance race. As in any endurance race, some endure to the end and win the prize. Others get weary and maybe faint or quit. Remember, many of the Hebrew readers were wearying and wanting to give up. That, for some of them, it would be going back to Judaism, kind of giving up this walk with Jesus. The writer is encouraging them. The writer of Hebrews is encouraging them to keep moving forward. This is encouragement we today may need from time to time. The writer is reminding them that endurance is needed, and this is a reminder we today may need. It requires determination, being unhurried but also not delaying. It means steadily growing on and refusing to be run off course. It means not letting obstacles and discouragement stop us. And it says, let us throw off everything that hinders, meaning anything that slows the progress of our faith. And what could that be? What could slow the progress of our faith? If we were in a room together, we could go around the room, but perhaps you'd think of bad attitudes or a lack of discipline, procrastinating, impatience. Let us throw off or lay aside the sin that so easily entangles. What sin could entangle us? Maybe the sin of unbelief would be the biggest one that caused the most damage. I found this running a race analogy brilliant when I read that the Greek athletes used to wear training weights to prepare for the events. It'd be like a baseball batter swinging the metal bat before he bats. The Greek athlete would wear these weights, but he'd take off the weights because it would hinder him, maybe entangle him. All right, lastly from this verse, we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. This great cloud of witnesses, men and women of the Old Testament, we've been studying these last, 18 times. These 18 installments. Get this picture, imagine this picture of Noah, Abraham, Moses, Rahab in the grandstands watching. The word witnesses comes from a Greek word martis, where we get the word martyrs, meaning those who can testify to what he or she has seen or heard. That's enough. Okay, a martyr, proving the strength of his faith by violent death later in the church, is where we used that word martyr. But back then it was those who can testify to what he or she has seen or heard. What is being said is that these Old Testament men and these Old Testament women are bearing witness to us. And what is that they're bearing? That God will see us through the race. God bore witness to them, and they are bearing witness to us. Another way to think of it is this great cloud of testimonies, inspiring examples. And what better encouragement is there than to know others ran the race and endured? And so that's why it's always good to study these characters and study them again and be inspired by them. So that ends our series on the Hall of Faith. And if we could just end with prayer, I would like to say, Lord, thank you for giving us your word. Thank you for these stories that you have given us to give us inspiration, to give us encouragement, to give us hope. Lord, may we take advantage of these examples and apply them to our lives. We ask you in your name. Amen. All right, take care, and may the Lord be with you.